do the thing after you swallow.
Thank you.
Don't want you to choke.
I'm good.
As you rush. I had a pistachio for the first time tonight after dinner. The kids love them. I don't like new things. And I choked on the pistachio because it was so dry.
Oh, not fun.
But it's okay. It happens. All right, here we go. Kerry Connelly, welcome to the show. Appreciate your willingness to come on. The 19th time, I think we found a date. So yes. We made it happen. We did it. The night of the vice presidential election. I could be doing a lot of things. I would rather be doing this than watching the next train wreck.
Oh my gosh, yes. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, good. I'm excited to have you here. So I always start off with a very simple question, but sometimes they're 20 seconds, sometimes they're 20 minutes. So what are you? Like, as you kind of roll back through the Rolodex of this is what makes me me. Like, what are those tent poles?
Oh, wow. That's such a good question, and where to start. What am I? I would have to say I'm a writer, I think, and I say that first and foremost only because it's one thing in life that I have to do that I would do even if nobody paid attention. I would just do it, right? So I think that that's definitely a part of who I am. I identify as a follower of Jesus. I am probably somewhat rebellious. I am an Enneagram 8, if that means anything to you, and a wife and a mom and a daughter and a friend, and probably more on the woo-woo side of like mysticism, and that's where my faith is kind of taking me after seminary kind of smashed it all to bits and then reconstructed it. So yeah, so I definitely fall more on the mystical side of it than anything experiential.
How do you define like woo-woo? What's the inverse of woo-woo?
What's the hashtag? What's the inverse of woo-woo? So
that's the episode title right there.
Right there, absolutely. That's a really good one. So what I will say is that the process of going to seminary, I really did, like any good seminary, it kind of completely smashed my faith to bits, which I think is a healthy thing, right? Mm-hmm. And then what happened was I looked down on the floor and I was like, oh, wow, there was a whole bunch of stuff in there that I don't really want, like legalism and patriarchy and a whole lot of stuff. And so that when I was coming out of evangelicalism, so when that happened and I removed those things, it left all this beautiful open space for my actual experience of the divine to come in. And once that actually happened, it was kind of crazy because I started having to pay attention to some of the stranger experiences that I've had my entire life. And I could no longer compartmentalize them. I had to kind of pay attention to them yeah, so that's where the woo-woo comes in.
That's a seminarian word. Yeah, the woo. It's Greek for
exactly.
Mystic. Yeah. So that's funny. Yeah, I've had people try to explain. I've had people ask me to explain the way that I see Jesus, and woo-woo's never come into the vernacular. But when you said it, I immediately was like, I get that.
Yeah.
I know what you mean.
Yeah, totally.
It's less Bible scripture passages and more Jesus, which I know how heretical that sounds, saying out loud.
In my opinion, any opinion that the old white guys that like decided, and I say that, but the dudes that got to put together and decide what got to go in the Bible, anything that they didn't like is called heretical, whether it's a true experience of the divine or not. And so I'm proudly on the side of the heretics because there's some good people over there.
Yeah. I mean, everybody's somebody's heretic. Yeah.
Exactly.
If you're Catholic, Martin Luther's a heretic. If you're Jerry Jr., I'm a heretic. Like everybody's somebody's heretic. It's totally fine. So I wanted to ask a couple, just so as I was reading through your book, which I don't want to get the title wrong. So let me make sure that I'm not misremembering. Yep, I didn't. Good White Racist, which is a title that when you see it on the end cap, you're like, wait, what? what happened here? What just happened here? So we'll come back to that. But
Yeah.
as I read through your book, I want to know on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being overt sarcasm, like what is your base level of sarcasm
Oh, it's pretty
in a
high.
day to day? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's pretty high. I
Because I'm
mean, I'm
assuming
from
the editors,
Jersey.
I'm assuming the editors filtered it down a bit.
Oh,
So like,
indeed.
what was revision 1? Like, what
Yeah.
was that at?
I had to, there were some things I had to fight for. I had to be like, no, listen, you got to let me keep this one, please. Like, please, this is just my voice, And it's also, I think anybody, not that I had a huge audience before the book came out, but for the people who did read the blog that I was writing and stuff, they would have expected there to be some serious sarcasm and snark, so it's, it's definitely who I am. Yeah. I should have included that in my first answer.
As I read through, I found myself nodding. I'm like, yeah. So for the longest time, I fought against the Enneagram, mostly because I don't like things that everybody talks about. Yeah. That's why I don't like the Patriots, which I don't know if you like the Patriots or not. It's fine if you do. I don't.
I don't.
But it doesn't matter what it is. Like that thing that everybody is like the shiny new toy. I'm like, I don't care. And for the longest time, Enneagram was that. And then at the prodding of my pastor and many other people, I began to dig into it. And I genuinely enjoy the process of that now. For the longest time, though, I, however, thought I was an 8. And upon further reflection after a couple of years, I realized I'm not. I'm a 5. And if I showed you my books and my notes and the way that I was just an unhealthy 5, like hoarding knowledge as a dictator,
Oh, yeah.
And, but 8 really felt good because that's the way that I was badly acting.
I know we're rough.
It felt good.
It did.
It felt powerful.
And I resonate with that too, because I don't really know a lot about the Enneagram. It confuses me. I've not yet studied it. I do want to. I want to actually get certified in it. But when the 8 totally resonates with me, but then I was reading that it could be possible I'm just a broken something else. And I was like, oh, I should probably look into that one of these days. Yeah. But I'm too busy,
Yeah. So my pastor's being trained by, and I don't know if you'll ever hear this, Barrett. I have no idea if he's listening. He may. You never really know. Sometimes he'll say something like, oh, he was, what else did I say in that episode?
One, I know.
What else did I say? Something about is you see those arrows. If you go against the arrow, that's you're being healthy. You go with the arrow, you're just like, not being healthy.
Right.
But yeah, it was funny is when I told him I was a 5, he's like, of course you are. And he started rattling off all these things. I was like, how long have you known?
Why didn't you tell me?
Well, that's not the fun part. Anyway, not while you're here. While you're here. So I wanted to address something that you said. It's either in the intro or maybe it's the person that wrote the foreword. I can't remember which, but I feel like it's in the intro that you felt the need to write this book on being a good white racist specifically to other white people, which I find is appropriate because we're both white people. Yep. To the best of my knowledge. And so why that clarification? What matters there? Why is that? Because I feel like most people just skip the intro. You know what I mean? In many books, they just try to get into the meat.
Yep.
Or they glaze over it. And I'm bad about that as well.
Totally.
Yeah. But why that clarification? Why does that matter?
I think it matters because partially it matters because white people in general especially white Christians, we tend to have a huge savior complex, like this white savior complex, right? And I wanted to be super clear that I was not trying to explain whiteness to Black people or racism to Black people. That this was not or to the BIPOC community as a whole. This is not, it needed to be very specific that this was a conversation between 2 white people, myself and the reader, right? And part of that also is about the fact that I'm sitting here as a companion along this journey, right? Having done some of this work, by no means am I done with this work, but as in complete, but I am doing this work along with the reader, right? And I think that that's really important. I think it's important for white people to take up this labor. I think Black people specifically, but we've asked the BIPOC community to do this work for far too long. And I think that it's time for us to do our part, and so that's kind of really why what I was trying to get at there is that it's really important for white people to understand that this is a conversation that white people need to be having.
Why?
Because whiteness is invisible to white people, and it's constructed to be invisible to white people. And so it's our sickness, it's our soul distortion or disfigurement. And it's our responsibility to go about the work of our own healing, right? And until we consider this work, just that, the work of our own healing, until we can really start to understand that this is something that is within us, that we need to root out and practice agency over, until we can really start doing that work and doing that discernment and that agency, practicing that agency, we're never going to heal racism, right? Black people can sit there and yell, and they can protest, and they can take to their knees, and they can do all of the things, and none of it will matter if white people are not willing to do white work. And that's why I do what I do, right? Is because my goal is to invite white people into a place of ultimate discomfort, and truly to deconstruct and decolonize our own identities, right? So that we can find the true self that I believe we are created to be, so that we can all move into a place of shalom, of what God actually intended for us.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite words, shalom. It's actually how I sign almost every email, unless it's just a quick, I'll get the kids after school. Those
love that.
Don't get a shalom.
Yes.
It's one of my favorite, because the concept of that word, the theology of that word is massive. Honestly,
yes.
It might even be the gospel.
Indeed.
different topic altogether.
Yes.
But yes, yeah. Anyway, so you're using the words, and I want to be real clear. I'm going to probably be tongue-in-cheek and devil's advocate.
Totally
because
cool.
most people listening most likely have not read the book. And for people listening, that's on you. You should hit pause and you really should read the book. Write the book. No, read the book is what you're supposed to say. Yeah, buy the book. Buy the book is what I was looking for. So it's been a long day.
I get it.
So when you say good white racist, I think most people are going to read that and go, I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
And you don't take chapters, because you take literally 3 chapters to define those. So what are you meaning to say when you say those? And then I have another question that I don't script these, that I just thought of from what you said a moment ago.
No, that's cool. So essentially what I'm trying to get at here is the idea of paradox, right? And I think that just in general, the American psyche has a really hard time holding paradox, holding this idea that we love binaries, right? And so holding this idea that more than one thing can be true at the same time. And also in our American psyche is this deeply embedded hero complex, right? This idea that Americans are always the good guys. And that is a message that is deeply embedded in our culture and in our national identity, right? And the truth is that we've done a lot of really crappy things, right? We've done a lot of, as a country, as a nation, we have some pretty horrific things in our history. And racism obviously and slavery obviously being one of the biggest, right? And so what I'm trying to help people understand is that white people, and when I'm saying good white racists, I'm not talking about the KKK, I'm not talking about neo-Nazis, I'm talking about good people who really care and don't want to be racist, right? The idea of racism is not something that they would aspire to. It's not something that they want in their psyche or in their lives. They don't want to embody it. And yet they are unwilling, because they are so intent on protecting 2 things: their own comfort, right? And they're feeling this defensiveness and this unwillingness to acknowledge the fact that they could be not all that good, right? Like that,
Mm.
that there can be, there's some goodness in them, and there's also some messiness in them, right? And so good white racists are people who are intent on defending their comfort and their inherent sense of their own goodness. And we need to deconstruct that. We need to be able to move through the discomfort and get to a place where, and sit with that, really sit with that discomfort and everything that it means and those messy feelings, and come to the realization that yeah, I am a good person, right? I do care about these things. And yet at the same time, I have still been complicit in systems of racism, and my silence has made me complicit, and I benefit from them, right? And until we can do that hard work, until we can get to that place where we're sitting with those messy feelings and moving in through a place of lament, I believe is something that we need to do, and despair. We can't ever do the actual work at hand, which is inviting the kingdom of God to appear here on earth, inviting shalom for all creatures on earth. We can't do that work until we are willing to sit in that mess.
Yeah. So a minute ago, and I'm going to come back to some of that, but a minute ago you had talked about, and I don't remember your words exactly because I can't write fast enough, about, the reason that it matters for the audience primarily being other white people is that we need to enact some change. We need to do something. So as I read through the book, and as I talked to some of my friends that are not white, there is a power structure, a struggle. And I've had this conversation with them often of, oftentimes we don't want to give someone else of a different race power and authority because we're terrified, if we're honest, that they'll do what we've generationally done to them back to us. But I find the odd, I'll use your word, paradox, that it is going to require whites expressing power and giving away power to enact that change. So, and I don't know if I'm saying that right, but
nope, you are.
I don't know how to ride that tension.
And that is, it's so insightful. And this is the thing that I think so many of my white friends, that when we struggle with this over, a bottle of wine or a couple of drinks or whatever, this is where we always get to, is that there is this tension, and there is going to be this messy period of time where we are going to have to center whiteness in order to decenter it, right? Like we are going to, there's this idea, okay, so you're a bunch of white people who care about this stuff, you're going to put on a conference. How do I not put on a typical white, especially a white Christian conference, right? Which is usually a bunch of white dudes up on stage and nobody else, right? So how do we really intentionally be intentional about sharing that platform? Well, just the fact that we have to come from the position of we own the platform and that we're going to share, that in itself is something that needs to be deconstructed. But that doesn't mean that we throw up our hands and say, well, then I'm not going to share my platform, right? Like I'm going to take all my toys and go home, right? We have to sit in that discomfort. And this is what ultimately the problem is that we have suffered a failure of imagination. Andre Henry, who is somebody that I suggest everybody follow.
I agree.
Yeah, he's great. And he tweeted one time, he said something like, I don't understand. And he was talking specifically about white women. He goes, I don't understand why white women place themselves in a role of anti-racism work, because isn't it equivalent to self-annihilation? And I'm like, yes, actually it is. It is the white work that when we are deconstructing our white identity, it is about dying to self. It is about self-annihilation. And the faith part comes in where we go, okay, I'm going to trust that God's going to show me what I'm going to be. But we have suffered this massive failure of imagination. And I think that was the way the book got started, and the way I even started this whole process was I watched an episode of On Being with Ruby Sales, where Krista Tippett interviews Ruby Sales. And if you
You
don't
watched
know,
it? I thought that was just a podcast.
no, it's a video.
Really?
Yeah, at least of this one. It's yeah.
I was today years old that
Yes,
wow,
go.
really?
Yeah, there's a website and it has video, and yeah,
Huh.
it's really cool.
I didn't know you could watch those.
Yes. Okay. And so if you don't know who Ruby Sales is, she's a public theologian, womanist theologian, and she was 17 years old. She was at a civil rights rally. She was standing on the porch of a general store, and a white man came up and with a shotgun and pulled the trigger. And a young white seminarian threw his body in front of Ruby and saved her life. He died immediately, changing her life forever. And in this episode of On Being, she says, I know we have a Black liberating theology. What I want to know is, where is the white liberating theology, right? Where is the theology that liberates white people from hunger and pain and drug addiction and all of the things? And I was so struck. I mean, it's such a womanist theology and thing to say, right? But I was so struck by the generosity of it. And it really got me thinking. I was like, okay, well, what would a white liberating theology look like? And I was sitting in seminary. I'm like, well, what better place to start thinking about it than in seminary, right? And then I realized this book really came out of my understanding that I needed to have an education on what white identity actually is, right? And that's kind of how I got to this book. But what I realized in the process is that we actually have this failure of imagination, that we cannot imagine what we would be without this constructed identity of dominance. And until we can begin to imagine what it would be like to no longer embody a false dominance, we will never be able to create or participate in the creation of a more just world. Yeah. So that's kind of.
Yeah. So for me, my faith really struggled a few years after marriage with having a child, because emotions happen and fives don't deal well with emotions, and yay, we did it.
Get it.
That's the most I'm going to say about that, because I'm not crying tonight. I'm not crying ever again.
Sure you're not an 8? I don't know. It sounds pretty 8 to me.
I don't know. You're a little of every number.
Yeah, that's true.
And I should find it or get my pastor to say it. There's one part where he's like, because it would take a 1 like when Jesus did this, and it would take a 2 like when Jesus did this, and it would take a 3 like when Jesus did this. And he rolls through all of these different parables and stories. And he's like, what I'm trying to tell you is, when you're healthy, that's what you're supposed to be. You're supposed to be able to access different ways to be with different people. Anyway, again, yeah. But he does a rant. It's one of those rants that I'm sure in seminary people memorize. You're like, oh, he's doing the story again. He's doing that every time he tweaks it slightly, and it gets better or worse depending on the week or allergy medicine or what's in there. So you're going through all this in seminary then? Like, that's when everything kind of shattered around this? Like, how does that go over in seminary when you're trying to talk about it? Or you just kind of, I'm going to sit in the corner?
No. Oh, so, okay. That's a, so that timeline is important. So I wrote a blog called Jersey Girl Jesus. I don't really write there anymore. I write more, that was on Pathos, but I write more on my own blog now, but on my own website. But, so I was writing a lot about race and LGBTQ rights and women's rights, and through the evangelical Christian lens, right? Or how should I say this? Not through that lens, maybe opposing that lens. And I, for a blog that had Jesus in the name, the most feedback I would get would be around racial issues and LGBTQ, obviously those two issues, which of course being the 8, I was like, oh, poke, right? So let's talk about that some more. And, I was just really shocked by the visceral reactions that I got from white people. And I started seeing patterns and noticing like the ways the comebacks and the comments, they all started to sound the same, right? Like the same arguments. And I was like, wow, this is a thing. And it kind of got me really interested in that. So I was already kind of there. And then my very first class in seminary, it's a diverse seminary. And it's I think it's the only one that actually has a PhD program in African-American preaching and homiletics. And so it's a pretty diverse student body. very first class we took, I had a 4-hour afternoon session in this very diverse, and when I say diverse, I mean there were Black people, and then there were white people at every end of the spectrum of racial awakening. And we had a conversation about race that was pivotal. I mean, it was exhausting, and it was emotional, and it was beautiful. And I think we all, I think, came out of that experience really well bonded as a class, as a cohort, right? And then throughout the rest of my journey, I was able to take classes in liberation theology and womanism and process theology, and to study all of these different theologies that, like, who'd have ever thunk that there were all these other ways to think about God and the Bible. Amazing. And I know, it's like, whoa, wow. Yeah. That's incredible. Yeah. Well, all those heretics, right? And and so when I was exposed to a Black liberation theology that starts to help me understand that, if God decided to come down and put a body on, then maybe God cares about bodies, and we should too, right? And how that changes my eschatology, and how that changes what I'm thinking about the afterlife, and what my reward is going to be, and what does heaven actually, all of those things. So it was pretty well received, right? Although it was also a wonderful place for me to say a whole bunch of really stupid things. And luckily I was able to make some really long lasting, I hope, deep friendships and relationships with Black people who were willing to invest the time in me, and sit with me and have those really hard conversations whenever I said something stupid, which was often.
Yeah, I often do. So two of my best friends on the planet they're both Black. And oftentimes when I'll say something stupid, one of them, so he'll go, Seth, that's bullshit. Like, no, he's like, I love you. And I know, but listen, no. Yes. No. And I'm like, well, crap. Tell me, like, what? I want to be better. Tell me, because I didn't know. And then in hindsight, I usually think I did know. I just didn't understand, which I think is a different version of the know. I want to jump around a bit. So you have a chapter on gaslighting and ghosting, at least. I think that's what it's called. But in there, you talk about microaggressions. So can you kind of explain what those are and how those relate to good white racism?
So one of the things that I think is really important to understand is that racism, and this is one of the, and I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to answer your question, because this is not going to sound like an answer to your question.
Perfect.
But I think it's important to make sure that people understand this, is that racism occurs on at least two levels. That's probably oversimplifying it, but there's the individual, right? And that's where people get the most defensive, right? Where we go, I'm not a racist, right? Why are you calling me a racist because I said this thing, slavery's over, whatever, Oprah's rich. So, like, there's that individual aspect that of the individual soul that we need to be addressing and practicing agency over, and that occurs with the thoughts that go through our minds and the ways our interpersonal relationships and how we embody those and behave in those, right? And then there's systemic racism, which is the collective sin, and that's the collective nature and the institutionalized racism that is causing actual oppression among an entire people group or people groups, right? And it's important to understand that there are two different places that it operates, right? And they are intertwined with each other, but and they are cohesive, and you can't really separate them, but you need to understand that they're both there, right? So microaggressions work both individually and systemically. So, for example, and I'll explain this because I'm not a Black person. I can understand it as a woman, because as a woman, I experience microaggressions all the time. And I can give you a perfect example of one. So I was on my way to an event where I was going to be speaking. I think I was speaking that night, called Brew Theology. And I got into an Uber, and my Uber driver asked me where I was going. And to be honest, I was kind of tired. I didn't feel like talking. I was really exhausted. And I was getting into an Uber with a male driver by myself, and I was preparing to go to this talk. And so I had to be on, I had to have my energy up, and I was right. And I get into the Uber, and he asks me where I'm going, and he's just started talking, incessantly. And then he asked me where I was going. I said, oh, I'm going to a thing called Brew Theology. And he got so excited because he had also been in seminary. And then he began to explain to me, after I told him I was in seminary, or he had not gone to seminary, but he started to explain biblical concepts to me. And I can't remember, but he picked like the most basic. It was like first day of seminary 101, like something. I can't remember what it was. And it was exhausting. And then he proceeded to tell me that at his church, he doesn't believe women should preach or pastor. And that is, that's a pretty blatant microaggression, but it's a microaggression because it's happening one-on-one. It's an interpersonal thing that's happening. And in that moment, I needed to make a choice. I could either end up confronting him and having a really uncomfortable Uber ride, right? Utilizing my energy and my emotional labor to educate him, or to fight with him, or to just even try to resist his oppressive patriarchal mindset, and to establish my humanity and to fight for my own humanity in its fullness, right? Or I could just be quiet and let it go and move on to the next thing, right? And as a woman, especially in the workplace, I might experience a number of microaggressions like that throughout the day, whether that's somebody touching my body in a way that I did not give them permission to, or making comments about my body, or making assumptions about my abilities because I'm a woman. All of these different things, right? Like he did, telling me that I cannot, for whatever, because of his theology, live into the fullness of my capacity, my God-given capacity and calling, right? So like all of those things, they are exhausting when they happen over and over and over again, right? So now you think about, let's move that to the racial aspect of the conversation, and let's talk about police brutality, because it's not like it's a topical moment. So there's, first of all, you have to understand the system of policing and how we over police communities of color, right? Like, so that's one whole thing, right? And then within that community of color, there might be a young kid, or let's say a young Black man, right? Who every day is faced with small microaggressions based on his Blackness, right? Whether it is from maybe a store owner, or whether it's from the police making small things like constantly pulling him over for something that a white person would never get pulled over for, or like all of these things, right? So, and slowly, and they kind of peel away at his patience. And one day he has a bad day, he's not feeling it anymore, and he loses his cool. For him, that's a deadly situation, right? That becomes a deadly situation. So that's one way that a microaggression or microaggressions operate at the systemic level, because now his life is in danger because he lost his patience with an agent of the state, right? Yeah. So microaggressions can also occur when my best friend Aisha has told me about how many times white women will come up to her and say, "You're so pretty for a Black woman," right? Or, "Oh, you talk good for a Black person," right? Like, what does that even mean? But those are small little microaggressions that you're kind of like, and you're almost like, most people, especially women who are socialized to be nice all the time, smile and nod, make sure the men are comfortable in the room. and that their feelings are always intact and their egos are not harmed, right? Like this is what the work that we do as women all the time. Black women carry an even bigger burden because they have to make sure that they're not just maintaining the male ego, but also the white ego and the comfort of all of them, right? And so for a Black woman, for example, to go through the world where white people might reach out and touch her hair because they think they can, because they think that's totally fine, right? And not weird at all, right? Making assumptions about her marital status, or like if she has kids, assuming she's a single mom, or, you know, or that registering surprise at her high education that she's achieved, the level of the high education she's achieved. Small little things like that, that Black people will have to put up with over and over and over again. And then when they finally respond with any sort of assertiveness, they are stereotyped as the angry Black woman, or, you know, the dangerous Black man, right?
Yeah.
So that's a little bit, does that answer your question?
Couple questions. So how long is this Uber ride? Like, where were
it was
was he just driving slow intentionally to get all of his really bad New Testament theology straight?
Seriously.
Phoebe didn't exist, or it just, and we're just talking about Phoebe anyway. Like, how long is this Uber ride?
It was like a 30-minute Uber ride, dude. It was horrible.
Oh man,
it was exhausting.
That's a long ride for him to diatribe like that.
Yeah, exactly. And he was yelling like he was really loud and just crazy.
Did you rate him? Because I've never taken an Uber because where I live so real, but you can rate people and say,
I did.
Bad theology hits potholes.
You want to hear something even funnier?
Sure.
Even funnier? Almost not funny, but it's funny. Haha, okay. Not funny. Is that like 6 months later, the pastor at his church reached out to me to ask the church where I would not be allowed to teach a man or to preach, reached out to me because he knew about my book and he wanted me to help him understand how he could, not be racist in his church anymore.
I feel like that's a good thing though, right?
It's a good thing. It's a great thing. But what I told him, I said, and they're not affirming too. So I said, well, the thing is that you can't only affirm like one third of a person. Like you can't affirm just their Black skin, but not their gayness or their womanness.
Yeah.
Like humans come in a whole package.
Yeah, as humans,
tend to do.
But yeah. So I'm not often speechless, but we did. So can I quote your book to you? Because you have a chapter on language, and outside of not saying words that I'm not going to say right now, I'd never really thought about language in the way that you do it. Is it all right if I quote
Yeah,
you?
sure. Go for it.
You say language is indelibly entwined with our identities that empire uses it quite effectively in torture. Or rather, empire uses torture to remove language from victims, reducing them to a prelingual state in order to appropriate their voices. And you go on to talk about where that comes from. But I'd never heard about language discussed in this way. The only really entertainment of torture I'd ever done was whatever I see on TV or like waterboarding or something like that, just because honestly I don't want to know.
No, who does?
Why would I want to? So talk about that a bit. Like it's just it was all foreign to me when I read it.
I remember the day that I found the article and the connection started being made right in my head when I found the article about ultimately what torture is about, especially specifically the article was talking about torture in South American dictatorships, the way that those countries tend to use torture. But I'm sure that our American government uses it equally the same, but
sure, we're good at it. We have the biggest military on the planet.
Exactly.
So I'm sure we're really good at it.
I'm pretty sure we are as well. Yes. And so essentially what the goal of torture is to remove the person, the victim, so far from any sense of community and their own personhood. And one of the best ways to do that is to remove their capacity for language. And so when you create such intense pain that they cannot speak, and instead are moaning in pain or screaming in pain, they are essentially reduced to a prelingual state, right? They've lost the ability to be part of their community because they can no longer communicate using the shared tool of language, right? And then what happens is that's the ultimate state of power, because then the torturer can now take their own words, the words of the empire, and place them into the mouths of the victims, which is what we have seen. I remember growing up, you'd always see images of soldiers who were hostages, like they were being held hostage, or people being held hostage, and they were saying words that you knew were not their words, right? But they were being used as a tool, as a propaganda tool on television, right? And so the words of empire had been placed in their mouths because they had been brought to a point of they had lost their language, right? Through the use of torture. So when I started thinking about America's history and our history as people who have participated in the kidnapping and the torture and the rape and the enslavement of whole groups of people, specifically Black and Indigenous people, but two different stories. So we'll stick with Black for right now, but I want to acknowledge the horror done to Indigenous people. But so when I thought about that and the ways that in which we have dehumanized them from the beginning, right, and never fully how do I want to say this? Because their humanity is not ours to give back, but we've never fully come to acknowledge their full humanity. Let's say it that way, right? Mm-hmm. We still hold all of these constructs, but so we took away their tribal identities, we took away their family identities, we took away their names. We called them all one word, right? All this Spanish word for Black, which became another word, which I'm not going to say, but right. we flattened and homogenized them all into this one identity. And then we shipped them over across the ocean and brought them here, where we gave them our names and we gave them our religion and we gave them our identity, but only to a point, right? And then we decided, in order to help the poor savages, we then decided we would be kind and educate them, but only to a point. And so we've never fully allowed them to use their voices, because now whenever we do, we tell them they need to be nicer about it, right? We tell them, oh, if you, I get that you're angry, but you need to be nicer because you're going to catch more bees with honey than you will with vinegar or something like that, right? Yeah. Like you have to be sweeter about it. But when you protest sweetly and you take a knee, that's not good enough. We're going to talk about, the flag that obviously has feelings, right? So we need to protect that flag, because
while you're wearing a bandana that's a flag.
My favorite is like the bedazzled bikini tops. Yes. Those are awesome, right?
Absolutely.
So so it's just amazing, while straddling a Harley. But anyway, so this is the what we've done. We've stolen their language. We've refused to allow them to have their voice. And one of the things that people studying torture have learned is that so often the assumption is that revenge, being able to perpetrate some sort of violence against the person who carried out the torture, would be the ultimate satisfaction for these victims. But in actuality, that didn't bring closure. What brought closure was to have their stories heard, to be able to tell their story, and to get their voices back, and to have their voices share their story, and to be heard and understood. In other words, to be reinstated back into community, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's what's never happened in our American narrative around racial issues, and certainly not with the church, right?
Right.
So does that answer your question?
Yes. Have you, I feel like you talked about him at the beginning of your book, but I don't know how to get to the bibliography in an electronic version. So have you read Mark Charles's most recent book, Truth? No, it's not called, what's it called?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I have not read his book yet. I actually interviewed him. Yeah.
It's a monster.
It's
Yeah.
amazing. His work is amazing.
Yeah, I had Mark back on like episode like 10 or whatever. And at the end
Mhm.
of it, I was just so mad. Like I was just angry. But there's something that he said, and it's in his current presidential run. Like you can't talk about reconciliation because we've never even had
Yes.
conciliation.
Right.
And like what's he call it? Like the cultural mindset or the cultural psyche or the culture. I'm not saying it right. Like, I
Mhm.
don't know. For those listening, just hit pause and then just
Yeah. Or
Google Mark Charles and make it happen.
yeah, his website is Wireless Hogan,
Yeah.
Hogan. He's brilliant.
Yeah, he's great. Yeah. I'm gonna try to talk to him again when he's not running for president because
It
that's
might, yeah.
a literal thing that's happening.
I know, and it might make him a little busy. I don't know.
I guess. Maybe not. So we haven't talked about the church much, and honestly, I'm not certain if we'll have time to. But that's okay because you talk about it a bit in the book, and there you have your own podcast as well that you flirt around with it as well. So that's easy to do. I have a couple more questions related towards what you talk about in the back of the book.
Yeah.
So I want to tackle some of those ones that you're going to see on Facebook and Twitter and everything else. My ancestors didn't do this, so I'm not racist. Black people owned slaves too. You talked about Oprah Winfrey being a gazillionaire a minute ago. Can you tackle some of those just in brief, because they are, especially the Irish and slavery ones, like because I find when I try to explain things to people, I think I'm only making them dig their heels in further. Like they're not listening, which is so frustrating. But if I don't say something, I feel like you use the metaphor at the beginning of your book of like, if you don't build a fence around this pool that people are drowning in, like you're a problem.
Right.
The pool is a problem, so's the water, but you also are an a-hole.
Yeah, exactly.
Someone drown.
Right.
I'm so frustrated.
Yeah.
So I don't know how to speak to some of those, which are the most common things that you're going to see in a lazy Google search that just gets posted into Facebook somewhere.
Yeah, totally. And it does take work, because I think that the way that a person, one of the things that I've learned in having these conversations online and in person is that in order for people to maybe not dig their heels in so much is they need to be heard, right? Every person needs to feel heard, right? That's what everyone wants to feel. And so what I try really hard to do is I try to attack narratives and not people, right? But in order to attack or to interrogate a narrative, and that's really what's happening, right? They're getting a soundbite. They're getting this narrative that they're being fed that is at best inaccurate, if not wholly false, right? And so we have to understand the narratives, and this is where there's going to be an investment for white people who actually care about this, is that we actually do need to know the facts, and we need to understand the full system that's at play here, right? So we'll go with the Irish. We're the Irish slaves, right? So first of all, that is a myth that came from one book that's been mostly debunked entirely, right? And people need to understand that there is a huge difference between indentured servanthood and generations of chattel slavery, right? Where whole generations of people were born into and died out of slavery, right? And lived their entire lives in slavery. The other thing that you have to understand for that particular construct is the way whiteness works, right? Is it true that my ancestors who were Irish came here? None of them that I know of came as indentured servants. However, what I do know is that they did come over under trauma, with great trauma. They came during the famine. They came here. They died. They became addicted. They were abandoned at orphanages. There were horrible things that happened to them that were deeply traumatic, right? That's still not the same as slavery. And what's more is that, yes, it's true that they could walk into a restaurant or walk up to a restaurant and see a sign that said, "No Irish, no dogs," right? And that's racism because they were not yet considered white. But they could also go down the street into a different bar and and where they were fully welcomed, and turn around and say, no Blacks can come in here, right? So they were able to operate with a much more fluidity on the hierarchy of whiteness until, and the further they got away from their own lineage, when they lost their brogues, when they stopped eating the foods that they ate, when they stopped listening or playing the music, and they became the Irish American, as opposed to the Irish, right? They were more fully assimilated into whiteness, so that, they could even lose their religion. They could pretend to not be Catholic anymore. And then they could pretty much pass as a good old fashioned WASP if they wanted to. Right. And and WASPs are the ultimate white people, right? Like that's ultimately what
you
whiteness,
give that acronym,
white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. So
perfect.
yeah. So think your blue bloods, your Mayflower people, right? Like that's who we're talking about. And so certain people, as they moved over, as people groups came over from different parts of Europe and other places, they would be assigned certain places on the hierarchy of whiteness. And then as they assimilated, they could move higher up and become more white, or, and other people were less white, right?
Yeah.
Black people can never become completely white, right? They simply can't, right? And then you have to understand the impact of generational slavery, and then the Jim Crow laws and how those impacted Black people economically, and then redlining. And you have to understand all of those things in order to be able to interrogate the narrative of, the Irish were slaves too. No, they were not. First of all, that's just a flat out lie. They were not slaves. And also the impact of generational slavery is so complicated. And it's like this big knotted twine, or ball of twine, right? Like that you have to try and pull apart to see clearly all of the ways that it has impacted families, to keep them impoverished generationally, to keep them under-resourced, undereducated, and created so many more obstacles in their way to success.
Yeah. So I want to ask 2.5 more things.
Okay.
Because there's so much that I want to ask that we genuinely don't have time. Because we haven't talked about education. We haven't talked about police reform.
So much.
We really want to talk about Colin Kaepernick, and we skirted around the issue. But again, people read by the freaking book. So there is going, maybe let's assume pie in the sky, we do this, and somehow you and I don't know how old your kids are. My oldest is 11. We raise a generation of, quote, woke people that are going to come alongside, and maybe we'll actually figure out how to be better human beings. What does that look like? Because I think a lot of people, and I'm going to use the word good faith, but it's used in poor taste on both sides. Like how should that look like 10, 15, 20 years down the road?
That's the question. And, I should not be the only person to answer that, right? The first way we're going to get to that place is it has to be an act of the collective, right? Adrienne Marie Brown is one of the most important voices. She's the author of a book called Emergent Strategy, and another one called Pleasure Activism. And, she talks about biomimicry, right, as a way of a human adaptation, things like that could actually lead to the kind of imagining that we need to do as human beings, right? Because it really is going to call for a new way of being. It's going to call for something completely different from what we've already known. And I do think that our youth can do it. I have hope. I mean, they took down an entire political rally through TikTok. I mean, come on, that's freaking amazing, right? So like, if they can do that, I think that they have it in them to make the kinds of structural changes that need to be made, right? But that doesn't get us off the hook, right? We still have to be doing the work to subvert the system, to be chipping away at it so that we're creating those weak spots so that they can come in behind us and just take it all down, right? And rebuild something new. And that sounds scary to a lot of people, especially I think the older you are, the scarier it sounds, because you're like, well, what's going to come next, right? Something will come next. America came next, right? And listen, I think that there's so much good in America. We have ideals that are aspirational. We've never lived up to them, right? But and America in and of itself is a paradox, because we had the right idea, we just didn't live up to them, right?
Right.
And so I think that when we can think back to what it must have been like at the time when these ideas were starting to be floated around, and try to capture something like that, similar to that now, that might be able to give us an idea, and then combine that with the shalom of God, the kingdom of God, what would the realm of God actually look like? And I specifically did not say kingdom, I said kingdom, KINDOM, right? Like, so it's not about empire, it's about family, it's about a shared space, it's about holistic well-being for all.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's actually the second question, and the half is just to give me, because I've asked it to everybody this year. So I knew I was going to ask it before we found the time to do this. So
Okay.
that's that. So what happens to the institution of the church that you and I are accustomed to in Western Protestant, I'm going to say America, but honestly it doesn't matter, because it would be the same problem in Canada or the UK or any English speaking country for the most part. Like, what happens if that happens, if we chip away at something and our children stand on the foundations that we've helped rupture, not rapture, different thing altogether.
Whole different thing.
Altogether, rupture. What happens to the church? Like, what happens?
So I think that's up to us. I think that's up to the church. I think it could either disintegrate, or it could become something even more beautiful and than we could ever even imagine. You know, I was talking to a pastor, because I coach pastors through racial, leading their churches to become anti-racist. And I was talking with one the other day, and what I think, first of all, okay, two things I want to say. My brain goes too fast. The first thing that I want to say is that I think you relate, right? The first thing I want to say is there was a guy, a rabbi, who came in and talked to a class, and he told us that in Genesis, where the scripture that's typically translated as "I am that I am," it's actually a horrible translation. It's a phrase in Hebrew that cannot be translated at all, really. But the closest thing that could come anywhere near it would be something more along the lines of, I will become all that I have yet to become, or I will be all that I have yet to become, which is this beautiful, like, it speaks to this beautiful state of perpetual becoming that God is, right? Which, you know, this is why I have no patience for people who point at other people and call them heretics, because who are you to tell me that I'm not a part of God's newest becoming, right? Or new way of becoming. And so I think that the church would do well to release our hold and our grip on what our constructs have been, and embrace what new thing God is doing. You know, I know that there's a scripture that says, "See, I am doing a new thing," and that is such one of the most hopeful, beautiful scriptures to me. See, I am doing a new thing. And I think that COVID has, and this is the second thing I want to say, that COVID has demonstrated the possibility. And I am not trying to make light of COVID. So let me just I'm not trying to say, hey, this was God's will, God wanted, like, that's crap. Okay. I'm not saying that.
No, you're right though. Yeah. It is, amplified timelines.
Yes.
It has to. Yeah.
Yes, totally. And one of the things that I think it's done for churches is it has expanded our walls to be so much more inclusive. At least the churches that I see doing a really good job of it, you know, they are now having people who are coming to worship with them from, you know, all the way across the country, right? And if we can find belonging in that way, if the church, if the Holy Spirit, if the Sophia of God can reach through Zoom and touch the hearts of, people in new and different ways, then I think that we can trust the Sophia of God to figure out a new way for the church to be, if we're willing to hear her, right? And hear what she has to tell us.
Yeah. So final question I've asked everyone this year. When you try to wrap words around what God is, like someone asks you tomorrow in an Uber, hey, you talk about God. What do you mean? Like, what are the words that you try to wrap around that?
Yeah, that's, it's like how to solve the political crisis in America.
Just pull the lever.
Yeah, just press the button.
It's that meme. It's the big red button with the guy with that. Yeah, it's done.
Right, done. I just fixed it. So I think the divine is everything that is in our consciousness and beyond, right? All of the things that we have yet to imagine, and I think it is the divine is pure potential, and genesis and creativity and life force, right? So I don't believe in a vengeful, destructive God. I think that goes against any kind of logic that anybody could try to apply to the concept of God, right? I don't, it doesn't make sense. I think men, not men as in, let me say humanity.
Adam,
yes, exactly. Adam can be vengeful, and we like to model our gods after Adam, right? But I don't think it goes the other way. I think God is pure life force and pure creativity in Genesis.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Where do people go? Where do they go to learn how? Where do you want people to go?
The best place to find all the things is my website, which is kerryconnelly.com.
Perfect.
It's all there. You can also check me out on Instagram, kerry.connelly. So
Kerry.com. I'm so bad at Instagram. I get on there. I like people's things and I don't know what to do with it. Like I get messages of being tagged in stories and I don't even know what that means. I click on it and nothing happens.
And it feels like as soon as I learn it, they change it anyway.
Well,
so.
I don't even know where the stories are. I've literally gone to those people's profiles. I'm like, what is it? Where is it? I don't know where it is.
They disappear 24 hours after 24 hours. That's why.
Well, I'd have to open the app more than once a week. Okay, well that makes sense then. I didn't know that they disappeared.
Yes.
That's embarrassing. I didn't know they disappeared. I've turned off the notifications for all of my social media. So I'm only in there when I feel like being in there.
Yeah, that's probably smart.
I get the heck out as fast as I can.
That is smart.
Thank you for your time this evening, and as well to your family. I'm sure they are either asleep or sacrificing time with you, so I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun. I really appreciated it.
Good. Thank you.
Awesome.
Wow.